Recently, the Evergreen Cultural Centre in Coquitlam hosted Inheritance, an interactive play which explores the issues of land rights and Canada's shameful history in its dealings with the original inhabitants. The play was produced by Alley Theatre and Touchstone Theatre in association with Vancouver Moving Theatre and community partnership with the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Centre. The play, marketed as a Pick the Path experience, quickly engages the audience as they are transformed from observer to invested participant in the exploits of urban couple Abby and Noah as they meet Frank, an Indigenous man who educates them on the First Nation experience and challenges their perception of Canada as a land where all are treated equally. The play is not only entertaining, it also inevitably evokes dialogue and challenges the audience to give greater thought to their own role in Canada's relationship with its First Nation inhabitants.
He signed an agreement with our chief here for almost 1 million acres to be used by our nation only. And then, and without our consent, that 1 million acres was gradually reduced down to 7,000 acres, often with the help of homesteaders like your family. That's 0.7% of what was agreed upon. And that specifically is the situation that you've inherited right here.
To find out more about this unique production, Tri-Cities Community TV worked with independent reporter Annie Smith to hold a Zoom conference with some of Inheritance key production personnel.
So this is very, very exciting for me to see you all again. Well, let's just get into it because there's no point giving you long explanations about anything. I wanted us to start with introductions. And so your name, your theater background, your role in Inheritance, and when you came into the process.
My background, I started back in 1990. I'm a teacher, a writer, a director, and an actor, and I do all sorts of things. I call myself a theater cockroach. Any way I can survive in theater, that's what I do. And so that's it. I've been around, like you said, a long, long time. And I was brought into Inheritance, I guess a year before we did the production. I was brought in by Darell, who introduced me to the whole gang, and really happy to be there. I felt very lucky.
Let's pass to producer people. So Roy.
Sure, I'm probably the last in before Herbie, I would imagine, in this group anyway. I'm Roy Surette. I'm the artistic director of Touchstone Theatre, and I've been an artistic director at other theaters as well, the Belfry and the Centaur Theatre, and back in Vancouver for about 3 years. I grew up on the West Coast and did theater, went to Studio 58 way back when, and have worked in the industry mostly as a director and as an artistic director. In Inheritance, Daniel invited me to a reading that was happening at the Friendship Center of the first act of a draft of this piece, and I was really intrigued by the ideas behind it and the content and the form. And Touchstone is a 43-year-old company that does a lot of new work, and it has a all Canadian mandate. And we like to do ambitious and relevant pieces, and this fit the bill completely. Like, I kind of thought it was crazy ambitious in terms of the scope of the play and the many different paths that it could take. And so we came on as a co-producing partner. It was a big show. We're kind of two smaller companies, but we pooled our resources to be able to pay for it. And really happy to be involved with it. It was I've known all of these people a little bit in different ways. Probably Daniel the best, and Daniel and Medina when they were writing, and I knew Darell's work as a playwright, and I used to listen to his CBC radio program religiously. So it was really great. And Herbie came highly recommended, and we'd met, but we'd never really spent time together.
Marissa.
I am the artistic producer of Alley Theatre. I'm also a director and a performer. I'm not a lead creative on the project. I've just been, mainly from the beginning, writing a lot of grant applications. That's how it started. And supporting Daniel when he was, bouncing ideas and reading drafts and things like that, and early research trips and things like that in the beginning. Outreach. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Daniel Arnold. My involvement in Inheritance is co-writer, performer, and co-producer. I'm a co-producer with Alley Theatre with my wife Marissa. And,
We live together.
Yeah. Oh, we live together. And I've I guess. Well, I don't know how long I've been involved with Inheritance. This idea, I guess I could see to around 2011 or so. So it's been a long time coming.
Medina.
I am a writer and a actor and sometimes producer. And on this project, just writing and acting. I came on board late. Herbie, I think I was neck and neck with you. So about November 2018, Daniel phoned. And I jumped on board because him and I have created many things over many years.
My name is Darell Dennis. I am from the Coquitlam Nation in British Columbia. My theater background, I actually started in theater because I was a rambunctious child. And the school counselors actually, with the help of my mother, enrolled me in acting classes in junior high because they were hoping for me to burn off some energy. And I got bitten by the bug. And I've been in theater ever since. I'm like, it's 97. Since I was started in junior high, and I've been professional actor, playwright. I've produced and directed some as well too. And my involvement in Inheritance, I was kind of, I guess. I was brought on by Daniel fairly early on in the process as a co-writer. Well, I actually started off as a dramaturg, and as needs and the process sort of expanded and got larger, I came on as a co-writer on the play as well too. So I think it was Daniel and I, and then I think, and then Medina came on board.
Where did the idea for the story come from?
The idea for Inheritance basically started with me. It basically started with I wanted to explore this notion of ownership and what has come to be known in my mind as the word stewardship, but I didn't really know it at the time. It wasn't until 2014 that idea actually cemented into something more tangible for me and more meaningful for me, which was when I learned that Vancouver and the majority of what we now call BC is unceded land. There are no treaties between the colonial governments and the First Nations. And when I learned that, all of a sudden this kind of seed of a premise became real and became like, oh, okay, so this is we can take an audience through a definite personal battle over essentially whose land is this and whose land should it be, and how do we rectify the past. And it was at that point that I basically got Darell involved as a dramaturg, and I sort of worked on it since then. That was the original seed of it.
Why is this idea important to you?
I think I somewhere in me, I have this deep need for justice, to see justice in the world and have injustice be righted, and fairness it is important to me. And so when I actually started to learn the history of this land and how it was colonized, I essentially became obsessed over this piece, because I felt like it was so vastly wrong. Yeah, I became obsessed with the idea of trying to have people engage with this and take action to rectify the past and what is currently still going on.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Like, why the idea of this story was important?
I'll jump in and say that I think right now we're going through Black Lives Matter and this incredible change in our world right now. And we've learned that oppressions are not only what we see, but also how we live. And ownership is a big part of that. In order for opportunities to occur, ownership is a major part of that. And certainly in Canada, First Nations people have been kept off of any kind of ownership. They're not allowed to own the land. It's Crown land that we're stewards of. And so when you talk about getting ahead to build a community, to get yourself into a place of wealth, those land ownerships have to be in place. And we didn't have that. The other thing was possession wasn't a big thing. If you were hungry, you took food when you were. So the possession. I talk a lot about. We talk a lot about the seventh generation in my community, where we're always looking at our effects now affect the 7 generations down the road, and in the European mindset, they think about the 7th decade. How am I going to exist when I'm 70 years old? How am I going to have enough money for myself when I'm 70 and beyond? So with that mentality, it's about hoarding. It's about making sure your pile is big enough that you can survive.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I would also say that just the ability to get information out to people, the ability to educate people about the history that we were never taught about in school. My generation wasn't. My son is being taught more. He's 8. There's just so much that we are so ignorant about. A lot of Canadians just had no clue. And I think when you start to crack that open for people to learn, and as they start to learn and realize, they will dive in more, and hopefully it'll touch the humanity in people to keep learning and rectify in whatever ways they can the history.
Can you explain the creation process? Why you decided to use the creation process that you used?
Part of it, I think, if I can, Daniel, I think you put a bunch of creative people in that space, and then we looked at every one of the obstacles and struggles that were in the way, and the solutions became the development. There was the idea of having the grand space of being outside in a theater, which creates that. And our designers, we had incredible designers who just went, well, we'll play with that. And then, when we struggled with lighting a part of a stage, then it became video's responsibility to cover, and then lighting went, oh, well, then I can do this, and that changed that. Everything was this collective group of people going, we're going to solve every problem that can possibly happen on the stage. I think we all looked for, Daniel had a clear vision of where he wanted to go with the production, and we all pushed towards that. And I think every one of the struggles that we hit, we solved it, and that was the creative process. Daniel?
We did a number of public readings that captured how are they reacting to this, how are they voting on the play, and that affected the text a lot. And then once we got into rehearsal, some things changed, some scenes were cut, but the main kind of structure of the choices and the structure of the text was there, and there wasn't any intentional improvisation. It was all pre-scripted. Sometimes there might have been a bit of improvisation here and there, but there was definitely, it was a script-based play, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's had a long gestation, right? So has the bulk of that span of time been script writing?
Yeah, I started writing in 2014. The original idea was potentially a screen version, and Darell was story editing on some of that. Then it morphed into a play the next year, I believe, and we started doing readings of it publicly, or snippets of it in 2016. And then it started to become closer to like, okay, we're gonna try and realize this on stage in 2018.
When did the idea of audience participation come into the process?
That was always a part of it, even when it was still a film version, a digital film version. It was always about a choose your own adventure sort of thing. So that was, I'm pretty sure, even back in 2011, when you first came up with the idea, I believe you mentioned that this was audience participation right from the beginning in whatever form it was going to take. So it seemed to me necessary. I think we could easily have told a story on stage that was 3 characters and doing the one we had, but I think it was and that would have been fine. But what I really liked, going back to the question, what I felt was important was putting onus on the audience to have them sort of not only reveal what their opinions and thoughts are on the subject matter that's happening in Canada, but to actually, sort of maybe start discussions amongst each other about why they chose the route they did, or why they didn't choose that. And and I think that was really important. That was a lot more important than just talking at an audience. 3 actors on stage, telling them what to think. So.
I was going to say that Daniel has been talking about Choose Your Own Adventure since I met him. So he was like 17. That's how long it takes for his brain to So he's been talking about that style of storytelling for a while.
Okay, cool. I'm really glad that you did it. I'm a big fan of audience participation. That's what I like. So that's cool. So was there any other kinds of audience participation or ways that you tried?
During the readings, we didn't have the clickers, but it seemed important to have the choices be anonymous.
So how do you feel about it now? Do you feel that using the technology worked well?
I think the simplicity of it worked really well, because people, because it was a simple click of one button. It wasn't on your phone. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't anything. It was a very simple. So a few of the shows I get to watch from above because I'm hidden away. I'm taking notes up in the, but I can see the audience and how they were voting. And sometimes it was like very close to the chest and I don't want anybody to see. And other times it was so much like, I'm voting this. So it became, and I think the more political it gets, the more you struggle with it. It becomes really interesting, and the simplicity, and yet the incredible work that Sammy did with his team for the dynamics of the voting were really interesting. I mean, we had a host at one point, right? Who would walk us through the whole, who was the fourth character, which sort of got eliminated when we found we didn't need it because of the technology.
Okay.
As far as a performer goes, it was already terrifying when we're up there, when you're waiting for the choice to be made, and you're just waiting because you're, as I think all three of us, I know we were just like, okay, if they choose that, then we got to do this and we got to do this, and
You're right.
for all three of them at the same time in what, like 30 seconds it took, or 15 for them to choose.
15 seconds.
You go through a lifetime of like I'm getting heart palpitations thinking about it now, because that was terrifying.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I wonder though if maybe that was probably the best approach to take, if that would have been the less stressful for us. I think it kind of worked. I mean, maybe having that host talking would have distracted us so much that, I think maybe the technology as we had it was the best way to do it.
The brilliance of it is that these three actors had to learn, 7, 10, 15 different plays, depending on how the audience voted. And that's the fun part of this Choose Your Own Adventure, is to go back into that theater and see it played another way. That's what if I chose that? What if I did that other thing? To see the play 3 times in 3 different ways becomes really stunning.
Okay, so how did you rehearse for all of these permutations and combinations? And
they were all staged readings up until we actually started the rehearsal process. So we don't, I mean, I'll let Medina talk on that, but we had no idea what to do once we started.
We had a huge map on the wall, first of all, to understand where we could possibly go after each choice. So we had a huge map on the wall. And then Herbie basically got us to run through each scene at least once. So by the time we had run all the scenes, not necessarily in all the orders, but we had given them all had good shot at all of them a couple times. And then honestly, you're just in the moment, and you have to go from scene to scene and take the information you had before and be present and go. So that's how we
That's right. We hadn't really, I mean, it's so hard to have a full run through of that play because of the different permeations that you could go. But I think you're right, Medina. Some of them we only ran like once.
And maybe ran it in a run once.
You had that. We hit everything 3 times. Everything some of them were a little bit more because they were the starts of other scenes, but yes, some of them were really glanced over. But basically what I did with them, first of all, was done rough physical blocking very quickly, got through it. And Daniel had worked out a timeline to say, we need to get to this point by this day, or else we're in big trouble. And we pushed that, and we were days ahead. Remember, Daniel? And then the second pass, we spent extra time sort of working out all the philosophy behind it. And then the third time was tightening all of that up. That was my goal. That was what I tried to get done, so that by the time they did it, they knew physically, they'd done it physically, they've got it in their body to move around. The second time was the discussion so that they have it philosophically. And then the third time was to really put it in there.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is insane.
That is insane. It was insane.
Totally.
Generally, you might rehearse a play in 3 weeks, sometimes only 2 weeks. But we rehearsed this play for 6 weeks. And then we had a week and a bit of tech in the theater. And we could, like, Alley Theater couldn't have done that alone. Touchstone couldn't have done that alone. It was combining our resources, like Roy said, that was able to make that happen. And yeah, I don't think we would have had a production if we weren't able to because rehearse for that long, because it was a lot of material to go through.
And on night too, we all were so comfortable with each other. It was such a lovely group that we could bypass a lot of the small talk to get on with it. You know, we could, which I think allowed it to happen the way it did.
But it was kind of an extraordinary ask of the actors, right, Herbie? And that was one of the things that was so wonderful about it. And they kept going, who wrote this? Who wrote this? Because they had to learn it. It's one thing to sit and write it and do it at a music stand, but it was an amazing feat. I just think it should have ran for 3 months so that you could get to do all of the different permutations a couple of times anyway.
Absolutely. The other thing is we had an incredible stage management team. They kept us right on the ball. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of co-producing, Roy, did you have any concept of what this would actually be like on the ground?
Yeah, I think it was like the concept was fairly present from the beginning, and the scale of it. And I know, as was mentioned, Daniel had some pretty clear and strong ideas of what he wanted to achieve going into it. And I just thought it was such an incredible opportunity to jump into something that was such a big puzzle. And it was sort of like, are you game? Like, for all of the players, whether that was the design team, certainly the actor writers in terms of what they had to do, but it was kind of, that was one of the best things about it. It was such an ambitious adventure in a lot of ways. And I think audiences, even the audiences that only saw it once, by having the other propositions put before them, they would say afterwards how enriching it was to just imagine if B did not win but C had won, what would have happened? They were so intrigued about, as Darell said, not just putting a version of the story out there, but looking at all of the choices that are being made through this pretty, intense drama that has a lot to say about a lot of current issues.
Mm-hmm.
What I loved about it was how engaged they were. How you would hear a vote happen, and then you would hear an audible response from the audience that was like, "Oh, that," So it became really interesting to see the excitement when their vote was chosen or when they lost a vote too. All of that was fun to watch. Roy, what do you think?
Well, and there was always that question that was part of the process is, are people going to go for the high drama, the most dramatic choice, or the ethical choice? And there was a point in the play where it was kind of trying to guide that a little bit more towards ethical choice. And then you guys, I think, wisely said, no, just let them vote with whatever their instincts are. But it was really fun to watch it go in different directions. I mean, there were some harsh choices that were seldom made, I think, but were rehearsed in text, that were really, violent, and then there were some of it was kind of the love fest. It quite often landed in a kind of a similar place. Not, I would say, I don't know, you guys, I was there 3 or 4 times, and there was a bit of a pattern that would quite often appear. But then there were some, it did run the gamut though, didn't it, in terms of the run?
I think like the fact that it was staged in the round was really beautiful, because I think that the piece, when you ask like, why is this piece important to you? The thing that comes to mind for me is us, we're all in this together. And that it's about something that only all of us can change. And it really does put the onus on the audience to have that feeling of being empowered to change. And so you look around the room, and at some points I was sitting across from incredibly like honored people. Like we had these guests that would come in, and they're like chiefs that have been fighting for justice for like years and years, and they're sitting across from me and they're voting on the same thing that I'm voting on. And that alone was so incredible. And then seeing like a 12-year-old boy, and then like just like the sea of faces kind of reacting all quite a little bit differently, with a clicker in their hand going like, what are we going to make happen in this? It was really special.
Listening to you guys all talk about this, the word that comes to me is integrity. To me, the piece had integrity.
your work had integrity, and you demanded that of the audience. And even though we're playing a game, and when you've got the clicker, you've got 3 choices, and you think, oh, well, I wonder what would happen if I clicked that one. That would be really interesting. And or do I click what I really want to happen, or do I click what I don't want to happen? And you're playing with that as in a game, but in the end, there is this drive to integrity, even for an audience member. And I think that that's a huge gift that you gave with this production, because if you guys didn't have the integrity in your own work, then I think the audience would have been able to disengage.
I'd just like to add to what Marissa and Daniel were saying too. I think that was one thing I really noticed working with them as well too, was that their desire for Indigenous, for people of color voices in their company is not just something that they ascribe to because it's politically correct or because the funders demand it. They genuinely wanted, witnesses from the Indigenous community to come to every single performance. They wanted that, they wanted the voices from the community to be a huge part of the production. And I think it sometimes above and beyond what was necessary. And I think that's really, when you talk about integrity, that's incredibly important, because this is one of those companies that I've worked with, and I've been in theater for a very long time, where I didn't feel like it was because they had to, or because it was, they'll get in trouble if they don't. I really felt like, above and beyond, they felt that those voices were important, and they were willing to step back and go, teach me, let me hear what you have to say.
Well, we couldn't have done that without Eugene Crane. He was our outreach coordinator, and he's seriously connected.
Yeah.
He just came with this list, and he was like, we're going to work down this list, and and then someone wouldn't be able to make it, and he'd be like, let me phone these 3 people, and he always found someone, and it was like magic. That's all, the only way to describe it.
Fantastic. Good casting, Eugene.
Renai Morrisseau, who was one of your talkback facilitators, she was the night I was there. And I had interviewed her before on the Weaving Reconciliation Project, and she had talked about cultural work. And in watching, the witnesses and they're giving the feedback, to me, that was cultural work. Would you frame it in that way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there are 2 components to this project: the play and the audience engagement.
Yes.
And kind of outreach into the community. And so we applied to a couple different granting bodies to do the audience engagement portion of the project. And so we were able to compensate our outreach coordinator and all of the guest witnesses that came in with that funding.
It's very hard to have something that is sort of Indigenous focused like that and not have that ceremony, a ceremony attached to it. And that I believe was really an imperative part of what we did. And I'm kind of glad to see that happened, because the stuff that we were talking about was about ceremony. It was about the land, and so much of our culture is based in the land, and that is our ceremony. That is so much of our identity and our people. So yeah, it was really interesting to bring that ceremonial part to every performance, as opposed to a lot of times in Native theater, you have it on opening night, somebody will come to prayer and will do a smudge or whatever. But this was every single night, which is very much, how, our communities do potlatches or other, any sort of ceremony. So it was really cool to have that sort of feeling.
That the talk back and the witnessing at the end, I don't know if I have the words for it, but it framed it in a certain way that made you be willing to take your own experience and your own thinking beyond just the frame of the theater. That it bridged it into who you are in terms of your own community. Because we were witnessing, the audience was witnessing, right? And that doesn't happen a lot in theater, but because of the way that you shaped it and framed it and that you brought this forward for us, then we were also cast as witnesses.
An important part of that as well, too, especially having the witnesses and having the talkbacks afterward, and having these native voices speaking, was that what it did was they were able to speak about what they saw on stage and either, say, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that, or that was not my experience. And the important part about that was that my character in the play was not speaking on behalf of all Indigenous people. People can't go, oh, I saw that play, that's what Indigenous people want, right? So I think that was also a very, very important part of that, and I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, of the three of you, you're the Indigenous person on stage. Yeah, so that puts a lot of freight onto that role, which would have been really counterproductive in terms of what you were trying to achieve with the production.
And he had the longest monologues to learn.
And I did them every night.
You did kind of cast him a bit as the storyteller.
Well, it was a lot of the choices that the audiences made kind of put me in that position, because there was a lot of, for some reason the paths they wanted to see were the ones where I spoke the most. So.
We got some feedback that was basically around, even though one play happened, a number of other plays happened in their heads because they were seeing choices that could be different. And so they were actually seeing the world in a more multi-lensed way, going, oh, I guess normally I would think that would happen. I didn't think that could happen too. And so I really love that, because even though the play might happen one way, they're automatically seeing, oh, it could happen another way. And in my own life, I didn't think about that. I could do this, Yeah. I really liked that.
Can you talk about the research?
Just quickly from mine, I started with basically with working with Darell. He was kind of like a dramaturg / I would ask questions to him. I also read his book, Peace Pipe Dreams, The Truth About Lies About Indians. And it is a fantastic book. We actually sell it at the play. So I started there. I started with him and with his book. And then I read lots and lots of books. I also read Unsettling Canada, which we also ended up including in the play with permission from the writers and publisher. And a number of other books, but still that didn't really get really like, there's only so much you can really get from reading. And so I said, Darell, we're going to take a trip to your territory. We're going to go up there and we're going to meet some people. So can you hook me up? And so he kind of reached out to some of his family members, and we met with some of them. And basically Marissa and I took a trip.
So Percy and Mayuk ended up becoming artistic advisors on the project. That whole trip was very informative. Not really from, I can't really speak to like, this is exactly what we talked about, but it was more on like a heart level. And I remember sitting in this truck stop, like just outside of Cache Creek, and I had this like vision of like the map of Canada covered over with the Canadian flag. And there was like this like corner of the Canadian flag peeled up, and behind was all this really bad shit. And I was just like, and it's not like I'm completely naive in my like knowledge at this point and whatever, but like I think it was just that like, next level of kind of sitting with the damage that this country has done to a lot of people, and also just the beauty of this unceded land. Like we drove back down from Cache Creek to Hope, and that drive is so striking and incredible. And doing this play about land, it just really kind of hit home.
We also engaged an advisory council that was specifically to, and some of the members were Indigenous, and that was specifically to make sure that as much as we could that the play was depicting reality, and that basically kind of to create a bridge between the fictional world that we're creating in the play and the real world that exists. And so this advisory council were by and large non-theater people, some of whom were elders, also elders from the territory on which we live, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so was that research? That was kind of research. It was like they would read the play, talk about the play, and so certain things morphed and changed because of that.
When Daniel decided that he wanted to set it in the territory that I'm originally from, I was able to sort of provide a little bit of, I guess, context to some of the stuff in the script, and we sort of changed things based on my sort of knowledge of the area and that sort of thing, because it's a very specific area that he's referring to. But as far as research goes, yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the immigrant experience, which, you know, Medina's character spoke to, or even the non-Indigenous, non-immigrant experience. So I could only really speak for myself and for my experience. So I think as far as the research goes, it was more just sort of, you know, giving my opinion and what I saw growing up in that area, or what that area is like, and what I grew up as, you know, experiencing as an Indigenous person and that sort of thing. And originally, earlier on, because of the work I had done, you know, on Revision Quest on CBC and through my book and stuff, I've done a lot of research on, you know, how governments, how the Department of Indian Affairs works, or what's it called now?
In Canada, the Department of Indigenous.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been. But yeah, stuff like that, you know, and how reserve land works. I think I was able to provide some context to Daniel, you know, as far as my understanding of all that goes. A lot of, you know, general history of indigenous people. It's my research there.
Darell is a wealth of research in and amongst himself, so.
Well, that's a brilliant segue into talking about what's next.
I would like to some rewrites after seeing it on his feet and being in these characters. That's a joy of writing and performing, is you get to live it and then fix what you think needs to be fixed.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a funny time to be talking about the future in the COVID situation, but you know, the hope is to maybe be able to remount and tour.
I guess we do. We know that there's interest from Western Canada Theatre to bring it up to Kamloops. We did a reading here before. That's the territory that the play takes place in, and so it feels very right to go there and do it. It also feels right to take it to Victoria as the next step, the capital city of what we now call BC, and there's some interest there too. And then, but yeah, like it's a weird time to be going because people can't program their seasons, so it's very tough. But we, one of the things that came out of the reaction to the play is that people really felt like they wanted not only for this to maybe tour, but to be seen by youth, and also be adapted to other mediums. And so me, Darell, and Medina have been talking about other mediums, like a podcast version, a screen version, and so we're sort of doing things to make maybe a couple of those happen.
And if you would have asked us 3 months ago, we would have been like, we want to go to New York, we want to go to Australia, we want to travel with it, we want to go everywhere. So
yes, that'll come.
Is there anything else that any of you want to bring forward?
I just want to acknowledge the design team and how wonderfully they worked together, and how they just had the set designer had so many different revisions and was just revising on the fly, and he just did an incredible job. And so the whole design team just really
Yeah.
the room so much, and I think like Herbie created such an incredible atmosphere for them and welcomed their ideas, and it was just such a like it felt like that rehearsal space was like home, and it just, I don't know, I think that the team really embraced the massive scale of what we were doing with such humility and grace, and I don't know, that part of it was like it was great.
Our stage manager, she was talking. I think she had to control something at one point, but they were just like when we were doing opening night. It was very interesting because they were just as freaked out as we were, like going on stage, because they also have to deal with the audience. Whatever the audience picks too, they all of a sudden then have to go in their, beautiful mind to go, X equals Y MC squared, and this goes there. They have to do that too. So it was interesting because we were freaking out, and then I looked and the crew was kind of like freaking out. So it was all this really electric energy as opposed to, someone up there pushing buttons and, whatever.
It wasn't only their first time doing it. It was the first time anybody's done in that style.
Mm-hmm.
It was not done like that before. So everybody was flying by the seat of their pants and learning.
So we're going to be out in just a second. So thank you. Thank you so very much.
Before we go, here's a look at some of the feedback that was received by Corey Wilson, who was the honored guest when Tri-Cities Community TV was in attendance.
Corey Wilson is with us this evening, and she is Kwikwetlem. She is currently the Executive Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Partnerships at BCIT and the National Indigenous Education Chair for Colleges and Institutes Canada. She is a member of the BC Law Society, and she practiced criminal defense and family law. She has 20 years experience in post-secondary education. She has dedicated her working life to ensuring that Indigenous learners and other marginalized learners succeed. So I'd like to put our hands together for our witness here this evening. So I guess in terms of starting the discussion, I would like to ask you about your reflections or your reactions to the play.
And I think the takeaway or one of the questions was, what can you leave or what can you do now? I think it's very timely. The play is exceptionally timely. It brought up a lot of issues and a lot of messages. And if I can think of a few takeaways for people in the audience, is that the reality is we're all here to stay. As much as I'd love sometimes for everybody to go where they came from, many of us are here. We're all here to stay. Together we're stronger as a country. But we all must and can do better. But the question is, how do we do better? We can talk about what reconciliation is. We can argue about the definitions. I get really tired of those discussions. Let's just call it blue. Let's just call it tree stump. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters, the most important thing is the actions that happen that make this world a better place. I think it's really important to understand that as Indigenous people, we're the only group of people. Obviously, there's exceptions, I know that, because we see our brothers and sisters, LGBTQ people struggle. We see disabled people struggle, but it seems to be okay to other Indigenous people. Why do we allow that to happen? We're the only group, the government of Canada decides who belongs to it and who doesn't belong to it. We're the only group that has laws that separate us from the rest of every single other person. So it's important to understand that our experience is just as bad, and I appreciate that you used the word genocide, because just because genocide happens over 150, 200 years or 500 years doesn't mean it's not genocide, because it didn't happen in a 4-year period in a country across the seas. So that's one thing to remember, that the lived experience of Indigenous people is something that is as equally something that has to be acknowledged. And I appreciate that you spelled all the myths and facts. No, we don't get a free education. Yes, we pay taxes, and yes, all of those things. It's important to remember that. And also, I think it's the idea of equity versus equality. It's an equity argument. This isn't an equality argument. We always talk, well, it's not fair. My family came here and worked hard for generations. Abby's family came and worked hard for generations. The homesteading laws did not apply to everybody but Indigenous people. Everybody but Indigenous people were allowed to take advantage of the homesteading law. People tell me, oh, my family's been here for 14 generations. How'd you make their money? We were farmers. Well, it was illegal for us to farm until 1951. It was illegal for us to possess farm implements until 1951. We didn't get the right to vote till 1960. The last residential school didn't close till 1996. It was the government of Canada said it was okay to discriminate against Indigenous women and Indigenous men since 1850 until 1982. And even then, the legislation they brought in place to rectify and to deal with that inequality in the Indian Act still has not provided equality for Indigenous women. So as people, as citizens, I think, the vote at the end, should you give back your land? Should we give it all back or 50% back or whatever? You need to figure out what it is as Canadians, even just the coronavirus, climate change, reconciliation, us as Indigenous people, what can we do to make the lives of those around us better? Whether they're Indigenous or not. How much do you need? How much do we need? We don't need to have 2 cars. We don't need to have all of these things. What do you have? Time, money, expertise? Who are you giving that to? Are you giving it away? Are you sharing it? What are you doing to make the lives of people around you better? And in some cases, some people's spaces are really small, right? They may only, go to the rec center or I guess not now, but seniors, they go to the community centers and go to Aquafit, or they do these things. You hear something racist, say no. Learn about it. Or to people who are doctors or lawyers or politicians or people with real power in this country, what are you doing to make things better? Because if my children don't succeed, your children are not going to succeed. We are a federal government responsibility. It's in the Constitution of Canada. The federal government is responsible for Indians and lands reserved for the Indians. That is not going to be amended away. We're at the negative end of every single socioeconomic indicator. Our population is the fastest growing population, with greater than 55% of us under the age of 25. And we're the least educated, the least employed, most likely to go to jail, most likely to go to foster care. There are more kids in foster care now that ever attended residential school. Jails, I practice criminal defense, it's at least $100,000 to keep somebody in jail. Why don't we give them $40,000 and pay for their full education or new skills training, give them a chance. So it's thinking about the resources that we have, the resources that you have as an individual, resources meaning time, energy, money, skills, the resources that you have as a family, the resources that you have at your workplace or the communities that you occupy, and the resources that we have as cities, as provinces, and what are you going to do about it? Because it's not, as we see, it's not just Indigenous people, it's climate change and it's this virus, because I don't know if this is not going to be the end of these types of things.
As for those who attended Inheritance, their feedback indicated that they believe they benefited from attending the play.
Did the play motivate you to do something differently in your life when you leave the theater? A, yes, definitely. B, maybe, can't tell yet. C, I'd like to do something, but I don't know where to start. Or D, no, probably not. Okay, I'd like to do something, but I don't know where to start. Interesting. Okay, next question is, how do you feel about the future of non-Indigenous and Indigenous relations on this land? A, hopeful. B, discouraged. C, I don't know. All right. General sense of hopefulness.